Okay, so grade 10s, this is your second lesson on Dulce et Decorum est propria mori. The first lesson was more of an overview of the poem and its themes. And in this lesson, we're going to look at it line by line. And we're going to look at the various figures of speech that Owen has used in this poem. So first of all, let's look at the first 4 lines of the poem. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs and towards our distant rest began to trudge. So in these lines, Owen begins the poem with a description of marching soldiers. His focus is on the grimness of and misery of the situation, which seems to have rapidly aged the men, who were mostly very young, and sapped, not zapped, sapped the life out of them. In the first line, the speaker compares the soldiers to old beggars bent under their burdens. In line 2, he compares their coughing to that of hags, a derogatory term for old women, and emphasizes their physical weariness as they struggle through mud. In lines 3 and 4, he clarifies direction, showing the reader that the soldiers are marching away from the enemy's territory, marked by the flares, and towards the place where they will be able to rest, which is probably their camp, but maybe even more long-term, they're hoping eventually to be sent home. The first 4 lines thus set up a scene, helping the reader understand the soldiers' fatigue, their frustration, expressed by the word cursing, and the constant danger that still surrounds them, represented by the flares. Owen uses consonants. Okay, so first of all, you may not have heard this word before. Consonance is very similar to alliteration, but the difference between consonance and alliteration is that the letter or sound that is repeated in alliteration, which is always a consonant sound, is usually on the stressed syllable. So, fighting free men. Okay, so the F, the repetition of the F sound in that would be an alliteration. Consonance happens when a consonant sound is repeated many times in a few lines, and it's normally in the middle of the word and not necessarily on the stressed syllable. So basically, consonance is the counterpart, the counterpart of assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sounds in the middle of words. Consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds in the middle of the word. So Owen uses consonants to lend a harshness to the sounds of the poem. In the first line, the letter B appears in 3 stressed words, bent, double, and beggars. This gives way to the hard C and K sounds with sacks, coughing, cursed, and backs. Although the K sounds of knock-kneed are silent, they contribute visually, because we don't say the K in knock-kneed. They contribute visually to the hard consonants of this section. The sibilants, now, you probably also haven't heard of the word sibilants. Sibilance is the repetition of the S sound. So sibilance of distant rest, meanwhile, makes it stand out from the rest of the landscape, sounding like a whisper, perhaps not entirely real, definitely a whisper of hope that they might one day be able to rest from this experience. These lines are basically in iambic pentameter, a meter that consists of 5 iambs per line. And I don't know if you remember, but if you don't, I'll explain again. An iamb is a foot, meaning a group of 2 syllables in poetry where the first syllable is unstressed and the second syllable is stressed. So you see here is one iamb, here is another iamb, here is another iamb, here is another iamb, and here is another iamb. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks. That is iambic pentameter. This sets up the expectation that the rest of the poem will follow this pattern. Owen does play with the stress a little, though. He crams more stressed syllables into the first two lines than belong in iambic pentameter, which perhaps helps us to understand the overwhelmed feeling of the soldiers in the situation in which he describes them. This decision to sets the rhythm of the poem rocking, and it's overstressed, unstable, reflecting the instability and roughness of the scene that the speaker is describing. Lines 5 to 8. In lines which are, men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. So in lines 4 to 8 of the poem, they elaborate on, 5 to 8, they elaborate on the physical condition of the soldiers. The speaker emphasizes their weariness through the use of hyperbole. For those of you who are not sure, hyperbole is a figure of speech in which a particular aspect of what is being described is over-exaggerated or extremely exaggerated. The soldiers are not actually asleep, or lame, or blind, or drunk, or deaf. But the extreme conditions that they're experiencing make these descriptions feel accurate. Another way to read these hyperbolic statements is that the trauma of the war makes them feel lame, blind, drunk, and deaf, even if, in a strictly physical sense, they are not. The detail of the lost boots and bloodshod feet is particular and vivid, as it gives the reader something specific to focus on within the atmosphere of general suffering and produces a visceral sense of the pain that they are in. These men don't even have shoes to protect their feet from the wear and tear of marching. Their feet are thus cut and bleeding and covered in blood, as they would be with shoes, because that's what the word shod means. It means shoed. So instead of being covered in shoes, they are covered in blood. So that it seems like they are wearing shoes of blood. Nevertheless, they must continue to walk. They have no choice. The overall image here is almost of the walking dead. The men are asleep, lame, drunk, blind, deaf, and bloodshot. The war has deadened the men, even if it hasn't yet killed them. And here we see again the extreme contrast that Owen is setting up between the image of the promised image of heroic, glorious victory that was promised by British propaganda and what is actually being asked of these soldiers. Lines 7 and 8 introduce a new danger with the dropping of gas shells, weapons that released poison gases like phosgene, chlorine, and mustard gas. The soldiers' senses are so numb at this point that they don't even hear the shells dropping, however, and so aren't alert to their danger. This highlights the horror of war, which is so deeply traumatic that soldiers don't even discern an immediate threat to their lives. Owen skillfully replicates the surprise of the attack by letting it sneak up on readers as well, using soft sounds and innocent-seeming words. The shells drop softly behind, with only hoots to signal their presence. It's not like some massive explosion happened that would obviously warn them of this attack. The poem also uses enjambment. For those of you who are not sure, enjambment is when a run on line, when a poem in the poem where there is no punctuation at the end of the line to stop the flow. So it increases the rhythm of the words and the flow of the words. So the poem also uses enjambment at the end of line 7 after innocent seeming hoots to entice the reader to rush on to the next line, which reveals gas shells. In contrast to the poem's opening lines, the consonants here are mild. Owen uses sibilance, once again, the repetition of the S sound, letting the whispering S sounds of hoots, gas shells, and softly contribute to the quietness of the attack. These lines maintain a general march of iambic pentameter, but with very significant exceptions. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Line 5 is mostly iambs, with a single trochee. Now, don't worry, trochee is a strange-sounding word, but all it means is it's the opposite kind of foot from an iamb. So an iamb is a grouping of two syllables with one unstressed and one stressed, like men marched, asleep. These are iambs. A trochee is the opposite of that. It's two syllables with the first syllable stressed and the second syllable unstressed, like many. So line 5 is mostly iambs with a single trochee inserted in the middle for many, while line 6 contains 4 iambs followed by a single trochee at the end. But in line 7, which starts with drunk, it's almost as if the meter itself has become drunk. And line 8 is notable because it only contains 9 rather than 10 syllables. It is as if that missing syllable is the moment of silence before the men realize what is happening and panic sets in. And do you see how the meter reflects the chaos and the panic that is setting in the way that it doesn't continue in a regular, predictable way, but rather starts to become very off rhythm and disjointed with the missing syllables and the stressed syllables changing order. Lines 9 to 10. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling. Fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. Okay, so with a stanza break, the reality of danger slams into the poem. Line 9 begins with the exclamation gas, which is immediately repeated in all caps. The urgency of the situation is clear, as someone exclaims, "Quick, boys," and the soldiers get their gas masks on just in time. Without protection, poison gas was lethal. Even moderate exposure could damage a soldier's eyes, nose, throat, and lungs. The gas masks the men had to put on to protect themselves, though, were bulky and suffocating, so they could not be worn all the time. Because of this, soldiers would have to move quickly to get their masks on at the first sign of gas. Owen describes the panic to put on gas masks as an ecstasy of fumbling. Ecstasy is usually used to describe an overwhelming state of joy or pleasure. The soldiers fumbling to put on their masks are completely overwhelmed by terror, vividly aware of their mortal danger for the first time in the poem. War has taken what is usually a word connoting joy, ecstasy, and turned it into a word connoting terror. Owen once again jams a lot of stressed syllables into the meter in line 9 before slipping back into a more straightforward, though not perfect, iambic pentameter in the following line. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. These 4 stressed syllables in a row have an emphatic force. That means they emphasize the meaning of the words themselves. Instead of rocking forward in steady motion, the line blasts, shouts, and shocks. This language effect upholds the panic and urgency that the speaker is trying to communicate by dropping back into the poem's overall metrical system for the last 4 feet of line 10 after the trochee of fitting to start off. Owen communicates a sort of relief. The soldiers have put on their gas masks and are relatively safe. Lines 11 to 14. Line 11 introduces an individual character. The poem up to this point has focused on the collective experience of a group of soldiers. Now the reader sees someone. If we read the lines, it says, "But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning." So now we see someone whose experience is breaking off from that of his companions, who have all managed to get their gas masks on just in time. Unable to get his mask on, the man panics and begins to feel the effects of the gas. His voice is just a yell beyond words. His movements are clumsy, stumbling, already out of control. The speaker initially uses two similes, you know what a simile is, to try to describe the gassed soldier. The first is like a man in fire, which gets across the intensity of the suffering. The man moves as if he is being burned alive. The speaker thinks next of lime, often called quicklime, which is an alkaline substance that reacts with water and causes dangerous burning irritation to eyes, skin, and lungs. Lime was an early instance of a chemical weapon used to injure and temporarily blind opponents. Possibly this is why Owen brings it up here, since the use of poison gas in World War I had relatively few precedents. But quicklime is also used in industries such as steelmaking. The similes, then, take what is an entirely unfamiliar experience to non-soldiers, being gassed, and puts it into terms, being set on fire, experiencing the pain of encountering quicklime, that are more common and accessible to civilian readers. The similes make the non-soldier more able to experience the horror of being gassed. Through the misty goggles of his gas mask, the speaker sees the landscape as dim, full of a green glow caused by chlorine gas. He compares this landscape to being underwater, and this leads him to a new way of explaining what he is seeing. "I saw him drowning," he says. This decision to move from simile to metaphor, I saw him drowning, even though he wasn't actually drowning. The comparison of breathing the gas is compared to, it's a direct comparison, comparing breathing the chlorine gas to drowning. Intensifies the image. It is not like the man is drowning, he is drowning in gas that he can't breathe. That is killing, or at least he's breathing and it's killing him. That the description of the soldier covers both burning and drowning suggests also that this is a new and complicated kind of suffering. It takes 3 different examples of danger, fire, lime, and water, to get across what the dying man is experiencing. The fact that the speaker struggles to explain what this kind of death looks like makes it all the more frightening, emphasizing the horrific and decidedly inglorious nature of death in war. Lines 15 to 16. In line 15, the poem suddenly shifts to a third stanza. "In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning." And the speaker shifts the poem in 2 ways, from the past to the present, and from a description of the exterior world to a description of the speaker's own interior world. These 2 lines reveal the speaker's current traumatic reality, in which, having survived the previous gas attack, he now has recurrent nightmares about the gassed soldier his earlier story describes. The images are inescapable, appearing in all his dreams. The use of the word helpless is key. The speaker is helpless to escape these visions of the past. and is helpless and unable to assist the soldier, just as he was during the event, and can only witness the dying man suffering over and over again in his dreams. Formally, there are several interesting things about these two lines. The stanza break shifts the setting of the poem, signaling that it is moving into new territory. This makes sense, since we are now out of the original narrative and into the speaker's present life. However, this break comes at an odd point in the rhyme scheme. The poem's first stanza is 8 lines long and follows the rhyme scheme A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. The second stanza begins to follow this pattern but does not complete it. After 6 lines that follow the scheme A, B, A, B, C, D, the break comes, leaving the rhyme incomplete. However, the third stanza then completes the rhyme scheme from stanza 2. Sight rhymes with light and drowning rhymes with itself. Why does Owen make this decision? Arguably, he is again using form to further emphasize and embody the meaning of the poem. In this case, the new stanza is not capable of standing on its own. It's as if it is a shard that is broken off of the previous stanza. It isn't a complete pattern. It's linked to the previous stanza but cut off from it by the break. Similarly, the speaker is linked to his past through trauma but cut off from it by time. He is doubly helpless, helpless to escape it and helpless to go back and change it. It is also interesting that Owen chooses to rhyme drowning with itself, using the word to end lines 14 and 16. Rhyming a word with itself, or otherwise called identical rhyme, is very unusual in English language poetry. It has the effect of calling extra attention to the word and deadening the motion of the poem by looping back to what's already been said. In this case, drowning becomes a word of obsession. It captures how trauma forces the speaker to keep reliving the gruesome experience of this moment, and also subtly puts the reader in a similar position. The reader is also forced to relive the moment through the repetition of the word drowning. Drowning is also notably a present tense verb, which implies continuing action. The soldier's death is not finished in the past. Because of the speaker's inability to leave it behind, the man continues to drown even after the fact. Owen adds to this effect by including 2 new verbs, guttering and choking, which magnify the ongoing horror of the speaker's dream. In terms of meter, line 15 is fairly regular iambic pentameter, but line 16 is nothing of the sort. He plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. There isn't really a single iamb in this line, and the line has 11 syllables. Almost all of the feet start with a stress as opposed to the unstressed stressed pattern of the iamb or iambic pentameter, and then the line goes on longer than expected. The meter itself captures the sense of the dying man plunging towards the speaker, and the extra syllable elongating the line, hints at the way that the speaker finds this nightmare impossible to escape. Lines 17 to 20. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil's, sick of sin. The last stanza of the poem is one long conditional sentence. Owen begins with if, and then spins the sentence out, keeping the reader waiting for the completion of the thought. If the reader could experience what the speaker does in his dreams, then what? In line 17, the speaker describes his dreams as smothering, echoing the suffocating effect of the poison gas and the inescapability of the recurring nightmare. Then the description moves past the gas attack to the moments after, walking slowly behind the wagon that holds the dying soldier. This detail adds to the agony of the dream. The speaker moves slowly and endlessly, forced to watch his companion's suffering. The description, the white eyes writhing in his face, in line 19 is unsettling, as it evokes the uncomfortable and disturbing sensation of eyes rolling back far enough to expose the whites only. Eyes also shouldn't be able to writhe. A verb which refers to writhing means a painful motion, a twisting motion. Often we say the person was writhing in pain. The movement of the soldier's eyes is thus deeply unnatural and frightening. Repetition comes into play again in lines 19 to 20 with his face, his hanging face. The sight of the face is strong enough that the speaker has to repeat it for emphasis, intensifying the image with the verb hanging. This is also a strange word for the context. To hang something is to fasten it on a point without support from below, often allowing for free motion. An arm can hang, or even a head, but a face shouldn't be able to. This imagery suggests that even as his eyes contort, the man's face itself is limp and lifeless, as if his skin is dangling from his head rather than animated by the life that was behind it. In line 20, the speaker then compares the face to a devil's, sick of sin. This simile is about extremity. How much horrifying sin would it take to make even a devil sick of sin? This language thus highlights the intensity of the soldier's suffering, which is beyond the usual territory of human experience. As he does in other places in the poem, Owen here uses consonants with the S sounds in devil's, sick, and sin, combining to hiss sharply, and that obviously evokes the memory or alludes to the serpent in the Garden of Eden, the devil. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, vile as cancer, bitter as the cud, of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. In line 21, Owen reinforces the structure of the conditional sentence that makes up the final stanza by repeating if. This repetition keeps the sentence rolling while piling on more clauses. The repetition also builds tension, as readers must wait longer for the follow-up they know must be coming. The speaker's description of the soldier coughing up blood is grim and intimate, and the speaker again turns the simile to explain the horror he is seeing. He uses the word obscene, meaning something offensive and disgusting to standards of moral decency, and compares the obscenity of the sight to cancer. This is an interesting choice of words, given that cancer isn't usually described as obscene or offensive in a moral sense. It's impersonal, a disease that attacks the body. Owen's use of the word suggests reconsideration, however. Perhaps there is something about cancer that is morally revolting in the way it invades and feeds on an innocent body. The poisonous gas is offensive and horrifying in a similar way. The moral revulsion might also stem from the fact that death by cancer was essentially meaningless. Cancer struck seemingly for no reason, and at the time it was incurable. Still is to a very large degree. There was no heroic victory to be had against cancer, no ideals to hold up. There was just gross, terrible death. By equating such a death to the soldier's own death, Owen is arguing that the death that soldiers face in World War I is similarly meaningless, unheroic, and pointless. The next simile Owen uses comparing the blood the soldier coughs up to incurable sores on innocent tongues. The simile begins with cud, or the partly digested food that cows and some other animals chew before swallowing again. The speaker isn't talking about the literal cud, though. The cud here refers to sores, infections on innocent tongues, by associating incurable sores with cud. Owen creates a distinctly upsetting texture. The sores are rough, grainy, wet, chewed on. They are bitter, too. This doesn't just refer to actual taste, but to the harshness of the situation at hand. The mere fact of the sores existing and being incurable is bitter. Looking back at the soldier's coughed up blood, readers have images of both sores and cud in their minds. Such images are physically disgusting and also made morally upsetting through Owen's emphasis on innocent tongues. Like cancer, the poison gas attacks innocent victims. The gas, however, is a man-made creation that humans then use on each other, a fact that again underscores the horror of the lack of glory in war. And of course, the message of these lines comparing the gas that these soldiers breathe and then violates their innocent tongues is also moving the guilt of the immorality of their experience onto the people who put them in this war in the first place. And so who in their right mind, Wilfred Owen is asking, who in their right mind would ask innocent young boys and men to suffer this kind of horror and then call it glory? Lines 25 to 28. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Line 25 signals the resolution to the long conditional sentence. If you could do this, if you could imagine that, if you could see what I have seen. The speaker comes finally to his point, ending the stanza. If his audience could experience the horror of his dreams, then they would not pass on to their children the idea that war is glorious. An explicit audience comes into play here. The speaker is addressing my friend, which could mean one literal person who is pro-war or referring to a larger group of people who are pro-war. Whoever he is addressing is representative of or in agreement with the culture at large, and they enthusiastically pass on with high zest the belief that dying in war for one's country is honorable and glorious. The words my friend and the speaker's relationship to his readers can be read in two ways here. In the first, the speaker might be authentic in calling the reader my friend and believe that the reader may be open to the speaker's message about the horror of war. In the other, the speaker may be speaking bitterly and sarcastically and believing that anyone passing on the old lie about war and glory is in fact no friend at all. One of these readings isn't more correct than the other. Both can coexist, and perhaps the speaker is himself unsure of what he thinks of the friend. The word friend does make the message of this address more intimate, more direct on the reader, feeling the speaker to be his equal and a close relative, which would then make the reader, feel more guilt about what he is expecting of young men when he claims with such high zest the old lie, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Meanwhile, the children who are told the story are ardent for some desperate glory. The word ardent means eagerly excited about and anticipating. They genuinely, sincerely long for the opportunity to achieve this glory. Through this description, the poem captures the perniciousness, that means evil, of the old lie. An older word, ardent, has associations with literature about romance and adventure. Owen is describing children who have been listening to this lie in many stories about chivalry and honor, not just one Latin line. These are children who have been raised with this entire tradition, stretching from the Latin words of Horace all the way up to the era of World War I. They have been primed by this tradition, by the old lie, to see going to war as a positive thing, as a means to glory. The phrase desperate glory describes a kind of a fever pitch of emotion. For something to be desperate, it is hopeless, a last chance. Desperation is a state of final danger. If glory is here, it comes at a high, high price. Owen's desperate glory describes, then, a glorification of death, a glorification his entire poem has served to refute by depicting a real death in all its lack of glory and its terrible, inglorious cost, which makes this desperate glory an oxymoron, because one would not imagine that glory and desperation are two things that could go together. It is worth taking a moment also to note that Owen capitalizes the word lie, which gives it weight and definition. So first of all, it isn't a misconception. It is a lie. It is told purposefully to deceive. Second, this isn't any old lie, but the old lie. It is central to the culture from which he comes, and it endures. It is the lie that death in war is glorious and honorable, and the implication is that it is a lie told by those who are powerful, so that when those leaders need armies in order to either protect or expand their power, they have willing young men to fill the ranks. The final words of the poem, which the speaker identifies as the actual text of the old lie, are in Latin. The lines are a quotation from Horace that is often translated as, "It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." That original poem celebrates bravery and resilience in battle, with cheerful generalizations about the perils of war. By including the original lines of the poem here, Owen evokes how far back into history the myth of glorious patriotic death goes, and therefore how deeply ingrained it is in modern culture. The speaker then, even as he asserts that such beliefs are the old lie, which sends young men to pointless, awful deaths and must be abandoned, also acknowledges just how strong a hold the old lie has. Owen has written a poem that, perhaps better than any other, captures the horror of war and exposes the old lie for what it is. And yet, even he gives Horace the last line. Owen clearly hopes to combat the old lie, but the structure of the poem hints that he is pessimistic about its being successful. The meter in the final lines of the poem again echo its broader themes. Line 27, which includes the beginning of the quotation, continues to follow the rough iambic pentameter of the rest of the poem. But line 28 breaks the pattern definitively. It contains just 3 feet instead of the expected 5. Through this incompleteness, Owen may be underlining his point that Horace's line doesn't tell the whole story about war, and that it leaves out the true brutality the speaker has recorded. In addition, this poem is also about the sudden, unnatural ending of a particular life. To end it halfway through its final line echoes this horrible cutoff of young men in battle, of the lives of young men in battle.